Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith, and this week we're going to do something a little different. So normally I start out with a idea, a use case, and a blank canvas, and we'll build something from scratch. This week I wanted to do an example on async JavaScript, and I've got an app that's the perfect example, but it's way too much to try to build in one video. So we're going to start with the finished app and deconstruct it. First, we'll check out how it works and talk about what's happening in the background and all of the different APIs and data sources used and the async functions that are required. And then we'll actually check out how it's worked and walk through some of those, actually through all of the JavaScript. So we're not going to build it from scratch today, but we'll look at some really advanced examples that you can use in your apps to handle these async functions between different data sources. So let's start out with checking out the app itself. Okay, you've probably seen tools like this before. This is a code screenshot generator. You can just paste in some code here, tell it what language and what syntax to use for the highlighting, and a bunch of other options for formatting. And then you can, use this for a tutorial or a social post or whatever. So I wanted to automate creating a set of these for a certain topic, like give me some sample data and then 3 different ways to filter it. And then be able to scale that and automate creating a bunch of those sets. So I used the OpenAI assistant, and we'll be showing that here in a minute. But I got the assistant set up to help write the sets of input code for this. And then this is the service I'm using to generate it. It's Showcode.app. This is an open source project, and it's also free. They have a free cloud version and a free API. And so this was just a kind of fun hobby side thing I wanted to do. And so I compared a bunch of different platforms, and this was the actually one of the best ones, period. But it also, was free and had a free API. So I ended up building on top of this service and OpenAI, and then saving the images back to Baserow. So this integrates with 3 different APIs, a lot of async functions going on. So that's the screenshot service. And now we'll look at the actual app here. I've got a prompt saying generate some sample data for the line items for a PC, for building a PC. And then I want to see 3 different examples of how to calculate the total using a loop, reduce, and then Lodash. So in the background, there's a bunch of APIs running here. That one button click, it is creating a thread, adding this message to that thread, then it has to run the thread, and then you repeatedly check for results because it's not there, and so I'm running that on a loop until it finally gets something back. And so now I've got some data back, and I've got it set up to where it is conversational. I can add an additional prompt to this and say, let's change it to, let's see, how about data about building a recording studio? And so I don't have to give it that full prompt again. It knows I wanted sample data and 3 different ways to filter it. So it's added this message to that thread, and then again, checking and rerunning until it gets a new response. So you'll see the numbers update here in a minute. It's going to give me some different parts for the recording studio one, and the total should change as well. There it is. So basically the same approach with the JavaScript, but it has generated some new parts here. So I can just have a conversation with this until I get the right raw data to send in for the screenshots. Then we go on to the Showcode.app API once I'm happy with this response, and I'll generate all of those images and join that data with this existing set here. So this is another async operation going through, and for each row in the table, call that API, get the image, and save it locally. I'm not actually saving it to Baserow yet because I'm still editing here. And you'll see the padding is pretty inconsistent based on the width of each one of these. So I can I've got the aspect ratio set, and then I can just change the width. It'll keep that aspect ratio, but I want to give this make this a little wider. We'll go with 1300, and then it'll just regenerate this one image instead of having to do the entire set again. So that's pretty close. I might, make this one a little bit wider as well, but once I get them all how I want, then I can save this full set. And we did a recording studio here, so I'll name it that. And now this one does another set of async functions, and it's first calling the Baserow API to individually create each file. Each one of these has to be uploaded and saved on that Baserow side first, and then get back its name, which is not the regular file name, but it's basically the end of the link, the part of the file link for that file in Baserow for its version. And so that has just created a new row here with all of the images in a single row. So it has to async upload each individual screenshot first, cache those responses and get the list, of the file references. And then each one of those has been uploaded. And now I've got that new sample here that's about the recording studio. So that's kind of the whole app. I do have another part I'm working on with N8N to zip all of these, just to see if I could do it. I don't really have a need there, but I love figuring out how to connect all these different things and just playing around with it. So back to the app here. I think that's everything I wanted to show as far as how it works, or what it does. Now let's look at the assistant that's helping me generate this response, and then we'll go into the app itself and see how that works on the JavaScript side. So here's the prompt for the assistant, and I can share this. I'll have a link on the portal so that you can copy the prompt, copy the app itself, and then you can connect it to your OpenAI with your API key and the Showcode.app and Baserow. So 3 different data sources if you want to settle that up. But I am going to provide a copy of each piece so that you could rebuild this. But basically, I've got a prompt that describes the response structure that I'm looking for. I want it to only respond in JSON so I can parse that out. And so I send an API request to this OpenAI assistant. And then I get that back in the app. So first we'll look at what that response looks like, just the raw response, and then getting that into the table. So we'll go to edit mode here. Actually, I've got another couple open, so let's use this one. Okay, so let's look at all the queries here. First, on the OpenAI, there's one of these that runs on page load. I believe it's create thread here. Okay, so this one, just right off the bat, as soon as you open the page, it is creating a thread. And if you check out the API docs here for the assistant, all of this stuff's in there about the steps involved to, get this kind of back and forth going with your assistant. So I create a thread on page load just to get the ID. And so that comes back, and now that there is an ID, I want to, actually, let's look at the next step. So the page loads, and it's a blank thread is created. Then you put in your prompt and click add message. And so what this does is runs the query, add a message to that thread. There's a callback to run the thread. So once it's received that message, you might add more messages, or at any point you can run it. And then if you look another level deep here, there's the third callback. And this one handles the loop of continually checking that that thread for a response from the assistant, because you can run get thread and check for that get run is what I called it here. But you can run that at any point and check to see if there's a response, and it'll give you a successful response, but it's not the one you're waiting for. So I've got to keep running that in a loop, waiting for it to actually have the data I want. So you click add message here, and it runs the first 2, which are direct here. That's just running an API, waiting for that to finish, and then running the thread. The third level here, this is a async function to handle that loop of checking again and again until it finally gets something. So we'll start with that one. And I've got a lot going on here. We'll collapse all this. All right, so this is an async function. It sets an interval every 3 seconds, or 3,000 milliseconds there. And it is running this get run query to see if the response is from the assistant. Now, if you run get run when you were the last person to add a message, it's going to come back and say it was user. As soon as you add a response, it comes back and says assistant, but they're not really done responding yet. And so the response I'm looking for is, it's really nested here, but this is checking for that value at the from the assistant. Um, it'll come back and say there's a response from the assistant. It's just not done yet, right? So I'm checking those two conditions every 3 seconds. And then if it meets that condition, then parse the response. So this function is async because it's running that loop, waiting 3 seconds, and then when it finally gets the response it's been waiting for, it runs parse response. So we'll check that one out next. And I'm just double checking that it's there. The other one had the same condition, but it'll error out if there's not that value there nested. So if there's a response, then I want to parse the response coming back, which is a string. I want to parse it into JSON, but it's nested, and it's wrapped in some markdown, 3 backticks, and then whatever language it is. So it'll be 3 backticks, and then X number of characters that are like Markdown or JavaScript or SQL or whatever it is, and then the closing 3 backticks. Remove all that stuff and replace it with just a empty string, and then I use JSON.parse to actually turn it into JSON that I can send to the table. Now, the table widget and list and anything else that displays data, it won't let you bind it directly to the response of an async function because there might not always be a response there. And to make the UI, always have something to display, you've got to abstract that away with a variable or the Appsmith, Appsmith store, some other place to reference first, right? So I have defined table data as an empty array at the top here. And then once this is ran and it's got a response, then I can just update that variable. So the table widget is okay with an empty array, but it's not okay with that response from an async function that hasn't ran yet, and it's just undefined, or there's nothing there to display at all, right? So that's adding the message, checking that first response, and then when you want to add a message again, the thread's already there. It's just adding another message, running the thread again, and then continually checking for a response. So that's pretty much everything on the OpenAI Assistant side. Let me, I can show the bindings here too. So first we create the thread, and that gives us an ID, and then you add a message to it. So we'll look at the both here, the body and the URL. The ID is coming from the last API that just ran. So the action selector helps you set that up and make it async. I didn't have to write do this dot then or await or whatever. This action selector will let you chain functions together, and it will handle the async logic. And if you just click the JS toggle here, you can see in the background the code that it creates by just picking the functions from the dropdown here. So, you select run this, and then on success do this, or on failure do that, and it's actually writing that JS for you in the background and making it async. Now, there's a third callback, and it's inside of this one, and then here you can see that at the third level, then you can write more JS here, but the interface and the drop down to just select something, that only goes 2 levels deep, and then the third callback is just reference your own function at that point. So that's where it keeps calling that check run until it gets a response. Okay, so now let's look at, I need to zoom out. Once you have that data, I should probably populate this so we have something to look at here for the next step. Then I'll run get all images. So this button is calling a function here, get all images, and we'll wait for this data to populate here real quick so that we have something to run it on. And then when I click get all images, it's looping through this data and sending it to the Showcode API and caching those images locally. Haven't saved them anywhere yet, and they need to be merged in with this data. I guess I got to zoom out some more to see that column. There it is. So I've got all the images on the client side now, and we'll check out how that part is built up with the get all images function. So here I've got this dot images that I am adding all of these values to. This is an object, and I'm using an object so that I don't have to loop through the full set to try to match things up. I'm just saving them where the name of the screenshot, whatever that title of the image is, and it displays up here, and it's this column here, the title. So I got an empty object, and then I'll have a nested object that's dot sample data, and that'll be the data for the first image. And then I go to the next one, and I can set it to row dot title. So I'm storing the images in an object to make them easier to access by their name instead of having to loop through every time in an array. The table needs it in an array though. So then here I'm getting all the images and just saving them to that local variable of this object. The table is able to join it and see it because the image column here, this image column, you'll notice that it has a delete button and the other columns don't. This is a calculated column, so you can just click add new column, and if I look at the settings here, it is a calculated computed value here, and I'm just taking the data of that image that came back from the Showcode API, turning it into a data URL just by putting that prefix in front of it. And then each row of the table here is looking into that object and finding the dot whatever total, and maybe not the best approach because this has like parentheses in the name and a period, but it works. I could probably have a separate ID to avoid some issues with characters there, but that's the approach anyway. So I'm saving them in an object and then joining it with the table by looking it up using that name to access that property in the object. Okay, the next option there is editing just one image. And let's see, update an image. I'm not even sure this one needed to be async. I think, yeah, I do await that one step to change the image. So here, I'm just taking the updated row value. And so when you try to edit the size there, if I click into here and change this number, now this table, table assistant code here, it has a updated row property. There's this object with that new value there that is showing the width that I wanted to add. But when I send all of this data to the service that's creating the image, right? I don't want to send the image. So I'm using lodash omit. Everything else in the table is the data that's needed to generate this image. This goes straight to the API saying, here's the title, here's the language for the formatting, and then the actual code and the width. But I don't want to send that image. So I have lodash omit there. Then there's images, the object here. I'm just updating that one by name. Once that's done, then I'm regenerating this new table. Here I do have to loop through it, and for every row, map over it, and either return the row just as it was for all of them except one. But if it is the updated row, if it's the one that I wanted to just now update, right, then I update that object here inside the images, which is how the table widget is looking it up. So that updates that one image in the full set. Now the next step is sending all of these to Baserow, now that I've got all of the images how I want them. So this function, button 5 here, should probably name that. Let's see. So on click, this runs upload all images. Go to that one. All right, so last we'll check out this upload all images function. So this does a couple things. It loops over the table, and it has to upload each image from the response that we got from the Showcode.app. They're only stored locally at first. It uploads each image to Baserow and gets back the name. And then after all of them have been uploaded, it has to wait for that loop. And then it creates a single row with all of the images. So we can't create this one row until all of the files have been uploaded and you've got that name property back to reference them. So here in the loop, I go over each row and run the upload file, passing in that row as a parameter. And then I also have to add in the image again, because that's a calculated column in the table widget, and the row object doesn't include that. So in the same way that I'm grabbing the correct image in the table widget using an object and saying go to images dot row title, I'm just doing the same type of reference right here to pass that file, upload it to Baserow just as a file on its own. It's not creating a row anywhere yet. And then collect all of those names, push them to this image names array. Once I've got all of them, and there could be any number of them depending on the response in the example. Once all of the images come back, then it runs create row. And we'll check out that query. So I've got just two fields. I'm giving it a name, and then that screenshots column, which is an array of files in Baserow. It just needs a list of the names. And so that'll have array name equals this, name equals, each file. And you've got to do that async and let all those build up, get all of the names, and then send a single response to put them into a single field. So I think that might be just about everything. I didn't really show these APIs, but creating the initial image it's pretty direct. Most of this is hard coded, and then there's just referencing the parameters that got passed in from that object. So there's the image width that I can set, and this is the one for all images. Up here, it applies to all of them when I create the initial set. But then to change the image width, that's coming from a row level for a specific row of the table widget instead of it being for all of them. So this one, the width is coming from the row object itself. Just like the other properties here, it's getting the title and the language and everything from the row level. And the initial one gets everything from that row level of the table widget except for the width. They all use that same starting one. So two APIs there, and then all of the stuff for the assistant that we went through and uploading the file. This gets ran in the loop. This is a multi-part form. You want to have the key as file and the type as file. And then one last thing here I didn't cover earlier. I'm not using the native JavaScript A to B. I'm taking the data here that gets sent back as base64, and Baserow is expecting it as binary. The native JavaScript A to B wasn't working, but this library base64, it's, let me see, this is an installed library here, and got this from JS Deliver. I believe it was this one. Yeah, so you can copy the link from here, and their A to B function was working better for me. I was able to get the file to upload, but it wouldn't open. It was sending bad data, something about the library to be able to convert the string. It wasn't doing it in the right format. But the default just dot A to B with this library worked fine. So instead of the native JavaScript, which would just be A to B like that, I'm using this library's version of it. All right, well, I think that's it for this week. I hope this has been helpful, kind of a different approach this time. It seemed like way too much to try to pack into one video to build all this from scratch. So feel free to drop a comment below if you have any questions or if you got ideas for other videos. I'd love to hear from you and see what you're working on and what type of content would be helpful. So thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.